My own family humiliated me, seating me at the kids' table for Thanksgiving while mocking my very existence. They thought I was just a pathetic, helpless outcast, so I served them a manila folder filled with devastating financial ruin instead. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The persistent, agonizing hum of the radiator was the only sound in my cramped apartment, save for the ragged, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. I was 34 years old, shivering under 3 layers of blankets, fighting off a severe case of pleurisy that felt as though someone had wedged a sheet of broken glass between my ribs every time I inhaled. The doctor had mandated strict bed rest and absolute quiet, a prescription that was violently interrupted by the sharp, demanding ring of my cell phone buzzing against the nightstand. I didn't want to answer it. My entire body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, but the caller ID flashed with my mother's name, Barbara. In our family, ignoring a call from Barbara was a crime akin to treason. I fumbled for the device, my fingers clumsy and weak, and swiped to accept the call, bringing the cold glass to my ear. "Hello." I rasped, my voice sounding thin and hollow even to my own ears. "Jade," my mother's voice came through the speaker, brisk, clipped, and utterly devoid of warmth. There was no "how are you feeling?" or "are you breathing any better today?" Instead, she sounded as though she were checking off a tedious item on a grocery list. "I'm calling to inform you that we've made some necessary adjustments regarding Grandpa August's estate and the firm." A cold spike of adrenaline shot through my chest, momentarily overriding the physical pain in my lungs. "What adjustments?" I asked, struggling to sit up against the pillows. "Now, don't get hysterical," Barbara sighed, the familiar sound of her practiced condescension echoing through the receiver. "You've been so unwell lately, and frankly, you've never really had the constitution for the pressures of the family business. Your sister, on the other hand, is thriving. She has vision. So, your Grandpa August, Uncle Christian, and I had a long talk this morning. We've collectively decided to grant Sadi full, irrevocable power of attorney over the holding trust." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The holding trust wasn't just a bank account. It was the central nervous system of Grandpa August's entire manufacturing firm, the company I had quietly kept afloat for the last 10 years behind the scenes. "You did what?" I choked out, a coughing fit seizing me, tearing at my chest. "Mom, Grandpa August hasn't been thinking clearly for months. You know his memory is slipping. And Sadi doesn't know the first thing about corporate finance or the manufacturing sector." "Oh, stop being so intensely jealous, Jade. It's an ugly color on you," Barbara snapped, her tone hardening into ice. "Sadi is a consultant. She understands wealth management on a level you simply don't grasp from your little cubicle. You just exist, Jade, you plod along. Sadi contributes. She builds. It's done. The papers are signed. I just thought you should hear it from me before the lawyers send the formal notices." The line went dead. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than the fluid in my lungs. They had cut me out entirely, replacing my decade of silent, grueling loyalty with Sadi's shiny, empty promises, manipulating a vulnerable old man to do it. The betrayal was a far more agonizing poison than the illness ravaging my lungs. I sat motionless in the dim light of my bedroom for what felt like hours, the dead phone still clutched in my trembling hand. My mind raced, piecing together the timeline of this coup. They must have planned this for weeks, waiting for the exact moment I was physically incapacitated and unable to travel to Grandpa August's house to intervene. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Before I could even process the magnitude of the loss, the phone vibrated again. This time, a photo of my sister flashed across the screen. Sadi. She was smiling brightly in the picture, wearing designer sunglasses on a yacht she didn't own. I answered, refusing to let her hear the weakness in my voice. "What do you want, Sadi?" Wow, someone's cranky, Sadie trilled, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I could hear the clinking of glassware in the background. She was clearly out celebrating. Mom told me she broke the good news. I just wanted to call and check on my big sister. Make sure you aren't having a meltdown. You manipulated an 80-year-old man with declining cognitive health into signing over his life's work to someone whose only credential is a fabricated LinkedIn profile, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the fury boiling in my veins. Sadie let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. Oh, Jade, always the dramatic victim. Look, you need to focus on your health. You're always so stressed, living in that dreary, tiny apartment of yours, crunching boring numbers for strangers. Leave the big, adult decisions to me and Uncle Christian now. We're going to modernize the firm. Liquidate the dead weight. We're talking crypto integration, offshore leveraging. Real visionary stuff. You're going to bankrupt him in 6 months, I whispered, the reality of her delusions terrifying me. I'm going to make this family richer than you could ever imagine, Sadie retorted, the fake sweetness dropping instantly, replaced by the venom I knew all too well. And let's be honest, you were never going to do anything with the firm anyway. You have no ambition, you're a glorified calculator, so just stay in bed, take your cough medicine, and be grateful we're handling things. Bye, sis. She hung up, leaving me alone once more in the deafening silence of my apartment. My chest heaved, and the tears I had been fighting finally spilled over, hot and angry down my cheeks. She had done it. She had completely rewritten reality, casting herself as the savior and me as the incompetent, sickly burden. She thought she had neatly severed my ties to the family legacy, locking me out of the castle and throwing away the key. But as my breathing slowly steadied and the tears dried against my skin, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. Sadie thought she had won because she had a piece of paper with Grandpa Auguste's shaky signature on it. She thought she was untouchable. But she had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the forensic accountant who had personally custom-built the internal auditing software Uncle Christian used for the firm, and my administrative backdoor access had never been revoked. To understand the sheer magnitude of Sadie's deception, you have to understand the decade that preceded it. In my mid-20s, while my peers were backpacking through Europe or climbing the corporate ladder in glamorous cities, I was sitting in a dusty, windowless office at the back of Grandpa Auguste's manufacturing plant. When the recession had hit hard, Uncle Christian, who loved the title of manager but hated the actual work, had panicked. The ledgers were a mess, vendors were threatening to cut off supply, and the firm was bleeding cash. Grandpa August had asked for my help. I had just finished my degree in forensic accounting, and I poured every ounce of my energy into saving his legacy. For years, I skipped vacations, worked 80-hour weeks, and meticulously rebuilt their financial infrastructure from the ground up. I never asked for a prominent title, and I never asked for public recognition. Seeing the relief in Grandpa Auguste's eyes was enough for me. Meanwhile, Sadie was busy finding herself. She spent her 20s drifting from one expensive, entirely funded by Barbara, escapade to the next. There was the year she was going to be a yoga instructor in Bali. The year she was a self-styled art dealer in Paris. Each phase ended in quiet failure, bylaid out by Mom's checkbook and swept under the rug. But 2 months ago, at Grandpa Auguste's 80th birthday party, Sadie had returned with a new, dangerous persona. She had arrived in a leased, pristine white Porsche, wearing a tailored designer suit that looked a little too crisp, as if it still had the tags hidden somewhere. She had rebranded herself as a boutique lifestyle and wealth consultant, a vague, jargon-heavy title that meant absolutely nothing, but sounded incredibly impressive to our mother. Throughout the birthday dinner, I had watched from the sidelines as Sadie cornered our grandfather. He was already showing signs of slipping, forgetting names, repeating stories, and Sadie preyed on that vulnerability like a shark smelling blood. "We need to be aggressive, Pop Pop," I remembered her saying, leaning over his chair, her manicured fingers resting on his shoulder. "The market is changing. You have all these static assets tied up in the plant. We need to leverage them. I have clients in Dubai making triple returns on decentralized finance portfolios. You're leaving money on the table." Grandpa August had just smiled, patting her hand, clearly not understanding a word she was saying, but charmed by her aggressive confidence. Uncle Christian, easily swayed by the promise of effortless wealth, was nodding along eagerly. I had tried to intervene then. I had calmly pointed out that manufacturing relied on liquid capital and stable investments, not volatile offshore schemes. But Barbara had immediately shut me down. "Oh, Jade, please," my mother had scoffed, waving her wine glass at me. "Don't be so negative. Sadie is dealing with high-net-worth individuals now. She knows what she's talking about. You're just an auditor. You look for mistakes. Sadie looks for opportunities." I should have seen it coming then. I should have recognized the hunger in Sadie's eyes when she asked Uncle Christian, supposedly just out of professional curiosity, for the login credentials to the main operating accounts to run some predictive modeling. She had been laying the groundwork for this takeover right in front of me, wrapping her greed in corporate buzzwords and our mother's blind favoritism. They had spent my entire life underestimating me, mistaking my quiet diligence for weakness. They were about to learn exactly how dangerous a quiet auditor could be. The moment the screen of my phone went black, a profound and eerie stillness settled over my bedroom. The feverish heat in my chest, the agonizing pain of the pleurisy, it all suddenly felt distant, muffled by the roaring rush of blood in my ears. They had orchestrated a coup. My own mother, my uncle, and my sister had leveraged my grandfather's declining mind to lock me out of the very foundation I had spent my entire adult life reinforcing. They believed I was neutralized, bedridden, and powerless. But they had forgotten one crucial thing: I am a forensic accountant. I don't just look at numbers, I build the architecture that houses them. 10 years ago, when I first overhauled the manufacturing firm's archaic bookkeeping, I installed a custom, localized enterprise resource planning software. Uncle Christian, terrified of technology, had begged me to maintain emergency administrative access in case he ever locked himself out of the primary ledger. I had coded a secure, encrypted backdoor into the master server. I hadn't used it in nearly 3 years, trusting that the automated fail-safes I put in place would keep the company's daily operations humming. Sadie, in her arrogant rush to seize control of the holding trust, clearly hadn't bothered to audit the firm's IT infrastructure. She thought having a piece of paper signed by a confused octogenarian made her a master of finance. I threw off the heavy blankets, shivering as the cold air hit my sweat-dampened pajamas. I dragged myself out of bed, each breath a sharp, staccato gasp, and stumbled toward the small desk in the corner of my living room. I booted up my personal workstation, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with a frantic, practiced rhythm. I bypassed the standard employee portal, diving deep into the command line interface. I entered my old administrative credentials, holding my breath. A small, flashing cursor blinked back at me. Access granted. The relief was sharp and immediate, but it quickly morphed into a cold, clinical focus. I was in. I pulled up the main dashboard for Grandpa August's holding trust and the primary operating accounts for the manufacturing plant. At first glance, the top-line numbers looked normal, which was exactly how a sloppy embezzler tries to hide their tracks. But I wasn't looking at the top line. I was looking for the leaks. I initiated a comprehensive data scrape, pulling every transaction, wire transfer, vendor invoice, and payroll log from the moment Sadie had returned to town 2 months ago. As the progress bar slowly crawled across my screen, I brewed a pot of incredibly strong, bitter coffee, my mind calculating the countless ways a fake, wealth consultant might try to siphon cash. When the data finally populated into my customized, high-density spreadsheets, I began the meticulous process of reconciliation. It took exactly 47 minutes to find the first anomaly. It was buried in the accounts payable ledger for the plant's raw materials supply chain, a recurring weekly payment of $14,500 to a newly added vendor, Apex Synergy Solutions, LLC. The category was listed as Strategic Paradigm Logistics Consulting. I let out a dry, humorless laugh that immediately triggered a painful coughing fit. Strategic Paradigm Logistics. It was the exact kind of meaningless corporate word salad Sadi loved to use to sound important. I highlighted the row, my eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. Manufacturing firms don't pay $15,000 a week for vague logistics consulting. They pay for steel, for freight shipping, for machine maintenance. I opened a separate browser window and ran a deep dive background search on Apex Synergy Solutions, LLC. It had been incorporated exactly 6 weeks ago in Delaware. No website, no physical storefront. The registered agent was a generic proxy service, but the routing number for the receiving bank account triggered a red flag in my memory. I cross-referenced the routing number with my mother's personal financial files, which I also happened to organize for tax purposes every year. The routing number belonged to a high-yield offshore account at a boutique bank in the Cayman Islands. A bank that Sadi had incessantly bragged about, networking with during her brief, failed stint as an art dealer. She wasn't investing Grandpa August's money. She wasn't liquidating dead weight for crypto integration. She was creating phantom vendors, generating fake invoices, and wiring the firm's operating capital directly into an untraceable offshore account. She was bleeding the company dry, right under Uncle Christian's nose. The adrenaline coursed through me, hot and electric. I didn't stop there. I worked through the night, ignoring the screaming pain in my lungs. By dawn, I had uncovered 3 more shell companies, all funneling money out of the holding trust under the guise of modernization fees and decentralized asset management. I documented everything. I downloaded the server logs showing Sadi's user ID approving the fake invoices. I traced the IP addresses of the approvals directly to Sadi's luxury downtown apartment. I compiled the evidence into a massive, heavily encrypted digital dossier. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was the architect of her impending destruction. 3 days later, my fever had broken, leaving me weak but fiercely lucid. I received a calendar invitation on my phone. It was from Uncle Christian, mandatory executive briefing, plant main office. 2:00 p.m. My mother had been CC'd along with Sadi. They were formalizing the transition. They expected me to dial in, meek and defeated, to listen to them dismantle my grandfather's legacy. Instead, I took a hot shower, dressed in my sharpest, most severe charcoal suit, and drove to the manufacturing plant. The main office was a familiar, chaotic symphony of ringing phones and clanking machinery from the warehouse floor. I walked straight past the receptionist, who stared at me in shock and pushed open the heavy glass door to the conference room. The scene inside was perfectly awful. Sadi was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, Grandpa August's chair, typing aggressively on a sleek new laptop, wearing a bright magenta blazer. Uncle Christian was pacing nervously, looking over a stack of glossy, branded folders. Barbara sat off to the side, sipping a sparkling water, looking immensely proud. Jade. Barbara gasped, nearly dropping her glass as I walked in. "What on earth are you doing here? You look terrible. You're supposed to be on bed rest." "I decided I needed some fresh air," I said, my voice steady, projecting an unnatural calm. I did not sit down. I walked to the opposite end of the table, planting my hands flat against the polished wood. Sadi stopped typing, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing her perfectly contoured face. "Look, Jade, this isn't the time for a dramatic entrance. We are in the middle of restructuring the primary asset pipelines. Uncle Christian and I have real work to do. You can review the meeting minutes later." "I don't need the minutes, Sadi," I replied, holding her gaze. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a single, neatly printed piece of paper. I slid it down the length of the table. It came to a stop right in front of Uncle Christian. "I'm just here to ask a quick operational question. Uncle Christian, who authorized the transition to Apex Synergy Solutions for our logistics oversight." Uncle Christian frowned, picking up the paper. It was a simplified ledger I had mocked up, highlighting the $14,500 weekly withdrawals. "Apex what? I don't know anything about this. Sadi, is this one of your new efficiency contractors?" Sadi's eyes snapped down to the paper, and for a fraction of a second, the smug mask slipped. A muscle in her jaw twitched, but she recovered quickly, letting out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. Honestly, Jade, Sadie drawled, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. This is exactly why you aren't involved in the macro-level strategy. Apex Synergy is a dynamic liquidity partner. They are optimizing our downstream supply bottlenecks using advanced predictive modeling. It's high-level asset leverage. You wouldn't understand the paradigm shift. I let the silence hang in the air for a long, agonizing moment. I looked at my mother, who was nodding along, completely hypnotized by the jargon. A dynamic liquidity partner, I repeated, tasting the sheer absurdity of the words. I took a step forward. That's fascinating, Sadie. Because according to the Delaware Division of Corporations, Apex Synergy Solutions has no employees, no physical assets, and no operational history prior to 6 weeks ago. And strangely enough, the IP address used to approve their invoices traces back to the Wi-Fi router in your living room. The color drained from Uncle Christian's face. He looked from the paper to Sadie, his mouth slightly open. Sadie, what is she talking about? She's insane. Sadie erupted, slamming her palms on the table, her voice shrill and defensive. She's a jealous, psychotic hacker. Mom, are you hearing this? She's illegally spying on my private networks because she can't handle that I'm actually successful. Jade, that is enough. Barbara stood up, her face flushed with maternal outrage. How dare you march in here and accuse your sister of whatever nonsense this is? Sadie is trying to save this family from the dark ages, and you are actively trying to sabotage her out of pure, bitter spite. You should be ashamed of yourself. Mom, look at the routing numbers, I said calmly, refusing to raise my voice. The contrast between my icy composure and Sadie's frantic yelling was stark. She's not saving anything. She is embezzling operating funds. Uncle Christian, if you don't freeze the main account by Friday, you aren't going to make payroll for the warehouse staff next week. You're a liar, Sadie shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. I am tripling our portfolio. I have investors in Dubai begging for a piece of this firm. Uncle Christian, don't listen to her. She doesn't understand high finance. I understand basic addition and subtraction, Sadie, I countered, locking eyes with my uncle. Check the balances, Christian. Don't look at her glossy folders. Log into the bank portal right now and look at the actual cash on hand. Uncle Christian looked paralyzed, caught between the nephew he trusted and the niece spinning tales of endless wealth. Barbara marched over and grabbed my arm, her grip painfully tight. Leave, Barbara hissed, her eyes blazing with a protective fury meant for her golden child, directed at me like a weapon. You are not welcome here, Jade. Go back to your apartment. You are completely delusional. I gently but firmly removed my mother's hand from my arm. I looked at Sadie, who was breathing heavily, her eyes wide with a panicked feral energy. I had struck a nerve. The facade was cracking. I'll leave, I said softly, picking up my bag. But the math won't. You can't outrun a ledger, Sadie, no matter how many buzzwords you use. I turned and walked out, leaving a toxic cloud of doubt hanging heavy in the conference room. The first confrontation was merely a tremor. I needed to prepare for the earthquake. Returning to my apartment, I threw myself back into the digital trenches. Sadie, panicked by my sudden appearance, made the exact mistake I was counting on. She tried to cover her tracks. Sitting in front of my monitors, I watched in real time as her user ID logged into the server. She was desperately trying to delete the Apex Synergy invoices and alter the outgoing wire logs. But she didn't realize I had already mirrored the entire server structure. Every time she deleted a file, she was only deleting a shadow copy, while simultaneously generating a permanent, time-stamped log of her attempting to destroy corporate records. She was handing me intent and malice on a silver platter. The stakes were escalating faster than I anticipated. As I dug deeper into the boutique consulting firm Sadie claimed to run, the horrifying reality of her situation came to light. I ran a credit check on her, a slight overreach, perhaps, but entirely justified given the circumstances. Sadie was drowning. She had over $200,000 in unsecured credit card debt. She had taken out massive, high-interest personal loans to lease the Porsche, to rent the luxury apartment, to buy the designer clothes. Her entire life was a house of cards built on predatory lending. When her creditors had started circling, threatening lawsuits and asset seizure, she had turned her sights on Grandpa August. She wasn't an evil mastermind. She was a desperate, financially illiterate fraud backed into a corner, using our grandfather as a piggy bank to stave off personal bankruptcy. 2 weeks passed. The tension in the family was a tightly coiled spring. Thanksgiving was approaching, the one holiday Barbara demanded absolute attendance for, regardless of internal warfare. 3 days before Thanksgiving, my phone rang. It was Uncle Christian. He sounded awful, his voice was hoarse, his breathing shallow. "Jade," he whispered, sounding like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "The steel supplier, Jenkins Manufacturing, they just called. They put a hold on our shipment for next month." I closed my eyes, feeling a heavy weight settle in my stomach. Non-payment. "Yeah," Christian choked out. I tried to log into the main portal like you said, to check the balances. The password was changed. Sadi said she updated the security protocols. She gave me a printout showing a surplus, but Jenkins says we owe them for the last 3 cycles. "Jade, if we don't get that steel, the floor shuts down. We lose the Anderson contract. The whole plant goes under." "She forged the printout, Christian," I said gently, offering him the harsh, undeniable truth. "She took the money." "Barbara won't hear it." He sounded close to tears. I tried to tell her something was wrong, and she threatened to have me removed from the board for insubordination. She thinks Sadi is a genius. She thinks I'm just slow to adapt. "Meet me at the diner down the street from the plant in 20 minutes, I instructed. When I arrived, Uncle Christian was hunched over a cup of black coffee, looking 10 years older. I didn't say a word. I just slid a thick blue binder across the table. It wasn't the final trap, that was reserved for a larger audience, but it was enough to break the spell. He opened it. Inside were the undoctored bank logs, the real-time wire transfers, and the irrefutable proof that the money meant for the steel supplier had gone directly to a debt consolidation firm under Sadi's name. I watched the denial drain out of his eyes, replaced by a devastating, hollow realization. He traced his finger over the numbers, his hand shaking. She stole it. She actually stole it. From her own grandfather. From us. She drained the primary operating fund to pay off her credit cards, Christian, I said softly. The holding trust is next if we don't stop her. What do we do? He looked up at me, entirely lost, finally seeing me not as the quiet niece in the corner, but as the only person capable of saving them. If I go to the police, Barbara will never forgive me. She'll say I framed Sadi. It will destroy the family. No, I said, a cold, hard resolve settling over me. The police come later. If we do this quietly, Mom will find a way to cover it up, to bail her out, to blame us. Sadi needs to be exposed where Mom can't protect her, where she can't spin the narrative. Where? He asked, terrified. I looked at the calendar alert buzzing on my phone. The annual family Thanksgiving dinner. At the table, I have everything I need. You just make sure Grandpa August is there, and you let me do the talking. I'm going to burn her fake empire to the ground. The drive to my mother's house on Thanksgiving Day was agonizingly slow, the roads choked with holiday traffic, and a biting, freezing rain that mirrored the cold dread pooling in my stomach. The back seat of my sedan was empty, save for a single, thick, heavy manila folder. It contained over 200 pages of meticulously printed, highlighted, and cross-referenced financial ruin. It was the culmination of weeks of exhaustive digital forensic work. A paper trail so brutally clear that not even my mother's weaponized denial could obscure it. When I finally pulled into the sprawling, manicured driveway of my childhood home, I parked directly behind Sadi's leased, pristine white Porsche. I sat in my car for a long moment, the engine idling, feeling the residual ache in my lungs from the pleurisy. I took a deep, steadying breath, picked up the folder, and walked out into the freezing rain. The moment I pushed open the heavy oak front door, the overwhelming scent of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and expensive Pinot Noir washed over me. The house was alive with the sound of clinking crystal and the low, murmuring hum of my extended family. I hung my damp coat in the foyer, my fingers gripping the edges of the manila folder so tightly my knuckles turned white. I walked into the formal dining room, forcing a neutral expression onto my face. The grand mahogany table was a masterpiece of holiday excess, set with my mother's finest china, gleaming silver, and a sprawling, elaborate floral centerpiece. My mother, Barbara, was floating around the room, directing the caterers she had hired to avoid cooking. Sadi was already seated near the head of the table, wearing a dark green velvet dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, holding court with a glass of champagne. Uncle Christian sat opposite her, staring down at his empty plate. He looked pale, exhausted, and terrifyingly anxious. He caught my eye as I walked in, giving a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He had ensured Grandpa August was here, seated at the head of the table, smiling vaguely at the noise. I walked toward the main table, looking for my place card. I circled the massive expanse of mahogany, my eyes scanning the beautifully calligraphed names. Christian, Barbara, Sadie, Aunt Margaret, Cousin Emily. My name was nowhere to be found. A cold spike of confusion hit me. I turned around. In the far corner of the dining room, practically pushed against the swinging door that led to the kitchen, was a small, flimsy, plastic folding table. It was the kind you bring out for a backyard barbecue. It was covered with a cheap paper tablecloth. There were crayons scattered across the center. Next to the single, uncomfortable metal folding chair was a wooden high chair meant for Cousin Emily's 2-year-old toddler. Sitting precisely in the center of the paper tablecloth was a place card that read, Jade. I stood frozen, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the insult washing over me. The room around me seemed to dim, the chatter fading into a dull roar. I had prepared myself for snide remarks. I had prepared myself for passive-aggressive jabs about my career or my apartment. But to be literally banished to the children's table, seated next to a high chair, was a public execution of my dignity. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the room. It wasn't loud, but the icy, sharp cadence of it made several heads turn. Barbara stopped instructing a caterer and turned to look at me, a tight, artificial smile plastered on her face. "Yes, Jade, is there a problem? We are just about to sit down." "Why is my chair set at the kids' table?" I asked, gesturing to the plastic monstrosity in the corner, next to a high chair. The dining room went completely silent. The clinking of glasses stopped. Cousin Emily looked down, suddenly incredibly interested in her napkin. Uncle Christian closed his eyes, bracing himself. Barbara let out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind a mother gives a petulant toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. She walked slowly toward me, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, stopping just a few feet away. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple, dark slacks and sensible sweater, her eyes filled with a potent mixture of pity and disdain. "Because Jade," Barbara said, her voice dripping with a poisonous, sweet condescension, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Grown-ups contribute. They build things. They elevate this family. You just exist. You take up space. Sadie is restructuring our entire financial future, and you couldn't even manage to dress up for the holiday. It's a matter of respect." From the main table, Sadie let out a sharp, cruel snort of laughter. She swirled her champagne, leaning back in her chair with an expression of supreme triumph. "Honestly, Mom," Sadie called out, her voice echoing in the silent room, "we should have uninvited you like last year. You always bring the mood down with your depressing energy. Just sit down and be quiet so we can enjoy the meal." For 10 years, I would have lowered my head. I would have swallowed the agonizing lump of humiliation in my throat, walked over to that plastic table, and eaten my turkey in silent, burning shame. I would have let them rewrite reality. But not today. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply walked forward, bypassing my mother entirely. I marched directly to the center of the grand mahogany table. I reached out, grabbed the heavy, ornate silver gravy boat, and shoved it unceremoniously to the side, spilling a puddle of brown sauce onto the pristine white linen. Then, I took the thick manila folder from under my arm and slammed it down onto the center of the table. The sharp smack of the heavy paper hitting the wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "What on earth are you doing?" Barbara shrieked, rushing forward. "You're ruining the tablecloth." I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on Sadi. Her smug smile had faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of genuine apprehension. "Since we are talking about contributions," I said, my voice eerily calm, projecting across the room with the practiced authority of a lead auditor presenting findings to a hostile board. "I thought it would be a perfect time to review exactly what Sadi has been contributing to this family over the last 8 weeks. I flipped open the heavy cover of the manila folder. "Exhibit A," I announced, pulling out a stack of glossy, high-resolution bank logs. I slid them across the table toward Uncle Christian. He didn't need to read them, he already knew, but the performance was necessary. "These are the primary operating ledgers for Grandpa August's manufacturing firm. 2 months ago, right after Sadi was granted power of attorney over the holding trust, a new vendor appeared. Apex Synergy Solutions, LLC. They have been billing the firm $14,500 a week for strategic logistics consulting." "Jade, stop this immediately," Barbara demanded, her face turning a mottled red. "This is inappropriate. We have guests." "It gets more inappropriate, Mom," I fired back, not breaking my rhythm. I pulled out the next document. "Because Exhibit B is the Delaware Corporate Registry filing for Apex Synergy Solutions. It's a shell company. It has no employees. It has no physical address." I pulled out a third stack of papers, these ones stamped with aggressive red banking headers. I threw them down in front of Sadi. "And Exhibit C," I continued, my voice rising just enough to command absolute silence from the stunned family members around the table, "are the IP address logs and the offshore wire transfer receipts. Every single one of those fake invoices was approved from the Wi-Fi router inside Sadi's luxury apartment. The money, over $116,000 so far, was wired out of the firm's operating capital, routed through a boutique bank in the Cayman Islands, and then immediately deposited into 3 separate debt consolidation firms." Sadi pushed her chair back violently, the wood scraping harshly against the floor. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking sickly and panicked. "She's lying," Sadi screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She hacked my computer. She manufactured those documents. Mom, she's trying to frame me because she's insanely jealous." "Am I framing you for your credit card debt too, Sadi?" I asked, pulling out the final, most devastating piece of paper. It was a comprehensive, undeniable summary of her personal liabilities. "Because according to this, you are $240,000 in unsecured debt. Your Porsche is 3 months behind on lease payments. You aren't a wealth consultant. You are a broke, desperate fraud who decided to use our grandfather's declining memory as a personal ATM to stave off your own bankruptcy." "Shut up," Sadi shrieked, lunging forward as if to grab the papers, but Uncle Christian suddenly stood up, his massive frame blocking her. "Sit down, Sadi," Christian growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, suppressed rage. "Christian, don't listen to her." Barbara cried out, moving to Sadi's side, grabbing her daughter's arm protectively. "Look at the letterhead, it's obviously fake. Jade has spent all week in her apartment concocting this sick fantasy to ruin our holiday. Sadi is making us millions." "Barbara, open your damn eyes." Uncle Christian roared. The sound was so loud, so violently unexpected from the usually passive man, that Barbara actually flinched, taking a step back. Christian slammed his fist down onto the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "The steel supplier cut us off on Tuesday. We couldn't make payroll without tapping into the emergency reserves. The money is gone. She stole it. She forged my signature on the secondary approvals, and she stole the firm's operating cash to pay off her own credit cards." The absolute certainty in Christian's voice shattered the remaining illusion in the room. This wasn't a jealous, sisterly spat anymore. The manager of the firm was confirming the theft. Barbara stared at Christian, her mouth opening and closing silently. She looked down at the documents scattered across the ruined table, the highlighted offshore accounts, the aggressive letters from debt collectors addressed to her golden child. The reality was a physical weight pressing down on her, and I watched in real time as her meticulously constructed world of superiority collapsed into dust. Sadi. Barbara whispered, turning to look at her favorite daughter, her voice trembling, pleading for an excuse. Sadi, tell him it's a misunderstanding. Tell him it's an investment strategy. Sadi didn't answer. She was backed against the sideboard, breathing heavily, looking like a trapped animal. The arrogant, untouchable consultant was gone. She was just a terrified fraud whose lies had finally caught up to her. From the head of the table, a small, frail voice broke the heavy, suffocating silence. Grandpa August was staring at the manila folder, his wrinkled hands shaking slightly as they rested on the armrests of his chair. He looked at Sadi, then at me, then at the scattered papers. The confusion that usually clouded his eyes had temporarily parted, replaced by a profound, agonizing heartbreak. "Please," Grandpa August whispered, a single tear escaping and tracking down his weathered cheek. "Please tell me this isn't true." "I'm sorry, Grandpa," I said softly, the anger suddenly draining out of me, leaving behind a deep, hollow sadness for the man who had built our family. "It's true." "You little bitch," Sadi suddenly screamed, lunging at me across the table, knocking over a wine glass that shattered onto the floor. "I deserved that money. I am the only one in this family with any style. You're just a pathetic little auditor who wants to drag everyone down to your miserable, boring level." Before she could reach me, Uncle Christian grabbed her by the shoulders, physically hauling her back. "You are done," Christian spat, his face inches from hers. "You are completely, totally done. The power of attorney is voided as of this second. You are not to step foot on the firm's property. You are not to log into a single server. And if you ever come near this man again," he pointed a shaking finger at Grandpa August, "I will personally drag you out by your hair." Christian turned to the rest of the silent, horrified room. "Thanksgiving is over. Everyone go home." He looked at me, the anger in his eyes softening into a profound, exhausted gratitude. "Jade," he said quietly, "call your lawyer friends. Tell them we need to file a formal police report for grand larceny first thing Monday morning." As the caterers awkwardly shuffled out of the room, and the extended family began hastily grabbing their coats in shocked silence, my mother collapsed into a dining chair. She buried her face in her hands and began sobbing uncontrollably, the loud, racking wails of a woman mourning the death of an illusion. Sadi stood frozen, realizing for the first time that there was no check Barbara could write to bail her out of a federal wire fraud charge. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I calmly reached down, picked up the scattered documents, and placed them neatly back into the manila folder. I had done what I came to do. I had protected my family's legacy, and I had permanently broken the chains of my own subjugation. I turned my back on the kids' table, the ruined dinner, and the weeping women, and walked out the front door into the cold, cleansing rain. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely legally binding. At 8:00 a.m. on Monday morning, I did not go to my cramped apartment office. I walked through the front doors of the manufacturing plant, flanked by two senior partners from the most aggressive corporate fraud litigation firm in the city, contacts I had built over a decade of meticulous auditing work. Uncle Christian was waiting for us in the lobby, looking exhausted but resolute. We locked down the building. I personally severed every digital connection Sadi had ever touched, scrubbing her access from the servers, the banking portals, and the physical security grids. The lawyers filed an emergency injunction with the state, freezing the holding trust and officially voiding the fraudulent power of attorney Grandpa August had been coerced into signing. By Tuesday afternoon, the police arrived at Sadi's luxury downtown apartment. She wasn't preparing a new pitch deck or networking with offshore bankers. She was desperately packing suitcases, trying to flee the state before the inevitable crash. They arrested her in the lobby of her building. The charges were staggering: grand larceny, elder abuse, wire fraud, and forgery. When the police impounded the leased Porsche and seized the apartment, the full scope of her financial rot was exposed to the public record. The consulting firm was officially dissolved by the state. The investors in Dubai were revealed to be a complete fabrication. Sadi was denied bail due to her status as a flight risk, forced to wait for her arraignment in a county holding cell, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit instead of designer velvet. Barbara broke completely. For the first 2 weeks, she tried desperately to hire defense attorneys for Sadi, draining her own personal savings to fight the charges. But when the discovery files were handed over, when Barbara was forced to sit in a sterile lawyer's office and listen to the recorded phone calls of Sadi mocking Grandpa Auguste's memory while draining his accounts, the delusion finally shattered. My mother suffered a severe psychological collapse. She retreated to her house, refusing visitors, refusing calls. The golden child she had worshipped had nearly destroyed the entire family, while the daughter she had relegated to the kids' table had been the only one competent enough to save them. It took nearly 2 months before Barbara finally called me. I answered the phone sitting in my new office at the plant. "Jade," my mother's voice was small, raspy, and stripped of all its former arrogance. It sounded like the voice of a very old, very tired woman. I don't know how to apologize. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it, Mom," I said gently but firmly. The anger I had carried for years had burned away, replaced by a cool, unshakable boundary. "You enabled a monster because you like the way her lies sounded better than my truth. Sadi is going to prison. And you have to live with the fact that you handed her the match to burn us down." "I know," Barbara sobbed quietly. "I'm so sorry, Jade, for everything, for Thanksgiving, for all of it." "I accept your apology, Mom," I said, meaning it. "But I have work to do. We can talk again in a few weeks." I hung up the phone. I didn't need her validation anymore. I had my own. 6 months later, the manufacturing firm was not just surviving, it was thriving. With the bleeding stopped and the phantom vendors eliminated, I was able to reallocate the recovered capital to actual modernization. We upgraded the warehouse machinery, secured the Anderson contract, and gave the floor workers the raises they had been promised for 3 years. I was no longer the quiet auditor hidden in the back room. Uncle Christian had officially convened the board and named me Chief Financial Officer. I had a corner office with a window overlooking the production floor, a team of junior accountants working under me, and the absolute, unwavering respect of every manager in the building. The most profound healing, however, didn't happen in the boardroom. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon in late spring. I drove out to Grandpa Auguste's house. The air was warm, smelling of blooming jasmine and fresh-cut grass. I found him sitting on his back patio, a blanket draped over his lap, watching the birds flutter around the feeder. Uncle Christian was there, grilling hot dogs, a relaxed, genuine smile on his face. He waved at me with a pair of tongs as I walked up the steps. "Look who's here, Pop," Christian said gently, tapping the old man's shoulder. Grandpa August turned his head. His memory was still slipping, some days were better than others, but when he looked at me, his eyes crinkled at the corners, bright and entirely present. "There's my girl," Grandpa August smiled, reaching out a trembling hand. I walked over, took his hand, and sat down in the sturdy wicker chair next to him. There were no plastic folding tables here. There was no condescension, no shouting, and no fear. "How are the numbers looking, Jade?" Grandpa asked, patting my hand. "The numbers are perfect, Grandpa," I said softly, looking out over the peaceful garden, feeling the warm sun on my face. The agonizing chest pains of the winter were a distant memory. I took a deep, clear, effortless breath. Everything is exactly where it belongs.